emotional experiences. If you're not, you're in the wrong room. I'm going to kick off with talking a little bit about myself. This is Julie when she was, I don't know how old, in Norway. I'm Norwegian. If I say weird stuff during the presentation, it's probably because I just made it up and I didn't know the word in English. So you can stop me and ask what that was. I started out my career chopping marble in Norway, wanting to be an artist. Did that for 3 years and then got bored, thought this is not going to make me any money. So I went to the UK and became a product designer, where I studied usability research, but from a product design background. And then I became a consultant at Bunnyfoot, and now I do digital consulting for usability. Why are we here today? Well, so I fell in love with sensory design when I was at my previous job, which was a product design company. And I really wanted to kind of get a better overview of what sensory design was, and it appeared to me pretty quickly that it's designing for emotion, and I will tell you why in a bit. Still, even though I read a lot of research, I felt that there was a lack of an overview and some practical kind of tips and tricks. So I wanted to give myself that, and by doing that I also thought, hey, it's useful and I could give it to other people as well. So at Bunnyfoot now I head out the Designing for Emotion course that we are launching this summer and going to continue on with in autumn. And yeah, that's what this talk is about. It's kind of like a foundation, so we're not going to go through all the emotions of the whole spectrum of it, because that would probably be a little bit overwhelming for 30 minutes. But we're going to start with some key things. When I say designing emotional experiences, it's quite key to explain what I think that means, because a lot of people is like, well, what is that? In a broad spectrum, it's just life. You know, we're emotional beings, and I'll show you that later. But it could be touching a physical product. It could be watching TV or advertisement. It could be interacting with a smartphone or a website. And it could be walking through an attraction or an airport. It doesn't really matter what you're doing. Everything is an emotional experience. So when I say emotional experiences or product, it's something that you've designed for these things, or a system that involves this, or yeah, basically just living life. Like I said before, I have read a lot of books about this, but these are the top 6 that I feel everybody should know about if they wanted to know more about them. There's the Aaron Walker, I can never say his name right. It's Aaron Walter, who I think he's the founder of MailChimp. We're going to use him later. Which is more about personality and how that's important to apply to your products, etc. And then there's Designing for Emotion with Trevor Van Gorp, which is kind of practical tips and tricks and talking a lot about arousal, and has a lot of nice diagrams and tabulated models you can use. There's Paul Ekman, the founding father of micro-expressions, and this is kind of a deep dive into what happens in your brain and a lot about the emotions and what that does as a public expression. There's Switch, which is more individual, kind of emotional, useful book, and then there's Emotionomics, which is more of how you wanted to use emotion in your kind of business strategy, and then there's the God, Donald Norman, Emotional Design, which has useful frameworks as well, although I'm not going to bore you to death about all the books, but these are really, really good books. One thing I learned from them is that they have loads of tables and examples for how you can design for emotion, but I still felt that there was a little bit of lack of structure. So I've taken some bits from these books and put them into this presentation. One thing though, however, that they do have in common, not all of them, but most of them, they have this example which kind of proves that, you know, society needs to change, and I'll tell you why. The question is, who do you think would win if the elephant decided to go down a path a rider didn't want to go, or didn't know that he wanted to go? Who do you think would win? Yeah. Of course, look at that, it's the beast of an animal. I mean, if the elephant wanted to go down a path, the rider afterwards would probably go like, oh yeah, well that was really useful because that was actually the shorter way, and I met this person, so that makes total sense. But really, you're just rationalizing the emotional decision you made. And all these books talk about this in some form. So what that tells me is that science says we're emotional creatures, society needs to change, and we need to design our strategies based upon emotion rather than the rational mind, because we don't actually sit there and think, oh yeah, no, that's cheap, that's why I bought it. It's like, no, you didn't. It was because it was green and you like green. Talking about emotion, we should cover the basics. So, what arouses you? See, everybody laughs, which is exactly what I wanted. Because I'm not expecting you to admit that to a room full of strangers. Because most people think about sex when they think about that, which is appropriate, which is exactly what I want you to think about. Because to understand emotion, you need to understand how you pay attention to something. And we pay attention to, intrinsically, food, sex, or danger, or as we like to say at Bunnyfoot, food, fucking fear. And marketing have been very clever in putting emotion into their strategies from like day one. I mean, look at that jeans advert, she's not even wearing them, you know, like, that's just a naked lady with jeans on her ankles. So, and I bet they sold really well. So it's just interesting to see how marketing has been clever in incorporating this kind of framework into their marketing strategy for a very long time. And I want you to keep that in mind, because when you pay attention to something, you actually evaluate it. You go, is it positive? Is it negative? Is it dominant or is it submissive? You know, is it something that's looming in the background and it's silent for no reason and you're paying attention to it because you didn't expect it to be there? Or is it a really loud sound that comes in your face straight away and, you know, it disrupts your thinking? Is that a positive thing or a negative thing? And you do keep that in mind once you're going through something that you're paying attention to. Now, people who are really good at incorporating this kind of strategy into their business is actually theme parks, casinos, you know, themed attractions. People who want you to be aroused all the time, people who want you to kind of feel like you're getting lost in time and space because so much is bringing your attention and you're just kind of floating through the experience. And another world that is really good at doing this is actually the gaming world, and we use that a lot in the Design for Emotion course, because the gaming world have also incorporated emotion into their strategies for a very long time. And what they're doing is they're designing for something that a guy called, he's got a very difficult name, Chick Sent Me High, I think. But Trevor Van Gorp has also done a flow chart, so I'll say his name again. Trevor Van Gorp translated that dude's flow chart into something like this. It looks a little bit complicated, but the baseline is flow means when your skills match the challenge and you continually build it up like this. And you can have different levels of it. You can veer off for like having an easy challenge, then a difficult one, and then so on. But it basically makes you lost in time. So if you think about one time where, like, I mean, from my part, it was The Sims. You know, not everybody is a fan of that like I am. But I played it, and then, 5 hours later, I was like, shit, she got pregnant, and I killed her husband because she wanted to see a ghost. All that stuff happened. I didn't even notice because it was so exciting. And that is designing for flow. And what they've done, which is so clever, is that they've tapped into not something that's just desirable or usable, but it's also persuasive and emotional. And at Bunnyfoot we have a diagram for this, and this is why we think it is so important. Basically, what they've tapped into that is so important is that in the UX market, it kind of started off with a product needed to be desirable. It needed to be something that you might do, It needed to have an attractive price or look and feel, but not necessarily be that usable. Then it moved on to kind of, it needs to be usable. People need to not only kind of see it as attractive, but they need to be able to do the tasks that we set them. So principles like Donald Norman's one came out. But then, still, it felt like people weren't really catching on in our world. I mean, in the gaming world, in the theme parks, they were doing it all right. But that's because great usability is no longer enough to be a differentiator in the UX market, not by itself. What is clever about some of the gaming and theme park people is that they incorporate the will do, the persuasive part of it. They add principles to it that kind of lure you in, not unethically, which some of our other courses talk about, because people are like, what, you're manipulating people to do shit? I'm like, no. But you do add clever psychology to the process, and they also add in something that's got to do with the love for something that you're doing. They're adding in affectional principles. They're adding in a motivation, intrinsic motivation. Avoiding disgust, which we will talk about later as well. So why should you design for emotion? It's because it's what makes people love you. And moving on from what makes people love you, love is, the foundation of an emotion or a feeling. But what are feelings and emotions? Do you know the difference between a feeling and an emotion? Did we know they were different? I didn't. I was like, oh, well, because you get that, how are you feeling? And I'm like, I'm feeling sad. And you're like, no, you're not actually feeling sad. Because the feeling of sad would be the lump in your stomach. It'll be the lump in your throat. It'll be like you're hurting somewhere you didn't know you could hurt. That's the feeling of sad. The emotion is sadness. So, the way I see it, I made my nice little cartoon. This is how I explain it through the course. You have steps. Step 3 is a lot more complicated than like this one brain that I've drawn. Paul Ekman will tell you all about that. But I've made it like this because it makes more sense to describe it like it. You have a sensory input. Let's say this dude stepped in a snake. He's not very happy about it. But he doesn't know that until he's had a feeling of it, an internal expression. So he stepped in a snake, his guts went, maybe his bum will scrunch up a little bit, all that stuff. And then his brain goes like, oh, this is gross, what is it? I'm disgusted. And then his face goes, ooh, like that. So that's kind of what the difference between a feeling and emotion is. A feeling is a sensory input. Emotion is the thinking that follows. So again, feeling, physical, emotion, mental. Now, why do we know about this? And it's because of little Albert. And I feel very sorry for little Albert and his friends. And for those of you who know what I'm about to say, you all know it's horrible, but very useful for psychology. But John Watson, and a behaviorist, he wanted to prove that you can be influenced by your sensory inputs, basically, in my translation. He introduced little Albert first to loads of furry animals, and he didn't know what they were, so he was really happy to play with them, and everything went fine. And then he introduced a really negative and dominant cue to the playtime, which disrupted little Albert so much he became terrified. So then I'm pretty sure he's probably, if he was alive, he'd still be terrified of furry animals. But what it proves is that you make a mental model out of the sensory inputs that you get. You have a perception of it, then you keep it. And the more you repeat it, the more it becomes part of your memory, and you'll navigate the world accordingly afterwards. So when it comes to some of the things that we know are pretty international when it comes to what gives a bad or a good feeling, we have this. So John Dodd will be able to talk to you about this one for ages.